the oral exam for Paul Cuff for his PhD thesis defense. Paul came here a few years ago and is now known to almost everyone in ISL and maybe some other places as well. The exam committee consists of myself, Saki Weissman, who's in Israel by Skype contact, Abbas Gamal, and Ben Van Roy. And when Paul arrived here a few years ago, one of the activities he had outside of the academic sphere that surprised me the most was he decided to play football. Since he hadn't played in college, he wanted the experience, so he signed up with a semi-pro team called the 49ers, and I played tackle football, and all the people who were frustrated by their college experience and wanted to really hit people were out there on the team. So you did that for a couple of years. And so Paul has a number of results. One of them on channels with memory and feedback, where the magic golden ratio comes up as the answer, so the capacity reaching down. But today he's talking about his main thesis topic, which is coordination in networks. Paul.
Thanks. I'm expecting an important call, so I'm going to put this in here. Okay, so Saki, I hope you can hear me, and thanks for setting the standard and sitting in the front row. So Tom mentioned the golden ratio, and I went ahead and put it as a teaser on this slide as well. It will come up at one point in this slide, so it's becoming talk, so it's becoming my favorite number. But and also, so my wife Larissa made this graphic for me, and I didn't realize that information theory touched so many fields. But thanks for that contribution. Actually, what we're the topic today is a bit unusual for information theory application of information theory tools. We're going to look at distributed systems and try to develop a theory of the communication necessary to establish cooperative behavior, coordinated behavior in these systems. So a few examples of systems. Here's a cellular communication system. We have a lot of base stations, and these are passing cell phone users from cell to cell. They may have different owners of different base stations, and they need to work in a cooperative way, doing some spectral reuse and maybe adjusting their power when they're interfering with cell users and things like that. This is to illustrate the distributed control setting. Robots may be sensing different things and cooperating to perform a task. Here we go with sometimes the coordination is done in a competitive environment. So sports are a natural example of that. And of course, a lot of communication is done in the huddle. Also, during the game live, there's some people notice things and need to communicate it to others so they can adjust their gameplay. Another and another competitive setting might not necessarily be a game, but be something with an adversary, maybe surveillance or something like that. And we'll see that example throughout in this talk. We also would like to understand the limits of communication in parallel processing. So here's a brain. It's doing all sorts of amazing parallel processing in different parts. And what is the required interconnectivity in order to do these computations? And there's another parallel computation that we think of with computers. Who recognizes this building? What building is it? This is the Googleplex, and I think only Google gets away with using colors like this, and I give them away. So So, of course, they're serving a lot of search queries, and they have these massive data centers with lots of computers. And the way these data centers are working is when a search query comes in to a buffer, it's actually partially computed on many different computers in the network, then gathered back together and returned. So there's a lot of high-speed data moving back and forth in these data centers, and we'd like to know, can we improve the efficiency here, or are we already efficient in what's being done? So the big picture of the direction we'll go with this theory is looking at a network that has certain communication links, and some information comes into some of the nodes in the network. Now, there's been a lot of research done regarding moving information in networks. Recently, there's a lot with network coding where you have multiple independent flows of information going through the same bandwidth or the same wires, and you want to know how to efficiently send them. There's sensor networks where you have sensors who are receiving information and want to, in a distributed fashion, calculate something about that information, like maybe the average of all the sensor measurements, and that would be distributed average consensus. Many other examples. So there's one, here's a fun problem just related to moving information around, the gossiping Dons problem, where every node has a unique piece of gossip, and you want to know how many pairwise exchanges of gossip are necessary so that everyone knows all the gossip. What we'll focus on in this talk is not necessarily moving information in the network, but instead establishing some coordinated behavior among the nodes in the network that's related to the information. So we'll send messages only when necessary to establish this coordinated behavior, and not require that the information is moved with a fidelity constraint, like is often done. And to begin, to make it more concrete, in general, what we're looking at is defining coordination by a joint distribution of the actions at all the nodes in the network. To make it concrete, we'll talk about an example of assigning tasks to the nodes in a network, and we'll start with just 2 nodes. But this really, this is a fun example because it's a little bit, the answers aren't necessarily obvious or intuitive. But it's still just an illustration of the types of problems that we'd use these tools to solve. So here, just consider that there are 2 nodes, and there are 2 tasks, and the tasks just have numbers, 1 and 2. And the objective is that they each do one of the tasks, but one of the nodes is assigned the task randomly. The other node then has to receive a message in order to be able to choose the other task, so that they're not equal. Well, in this case, it's pretty clear that 1 bit of information needs to be sent, so you can say whether you're doing task 1 or task 2, so the counterpart can do the opposite task. But what if the number of tasks is larger? So now we have k tasks. Again, we're only going to do 1 task at each node, but we want to make sure that they're different tasks. Okay, so a random task is assigned to x. How much should be said about that so that y can choose a different task? Any suggestions on this?
Divide into 2 groups and send the things corresponding to that group. You need only 1.
Okay, you jumped right past the first trap, which was that it was supposed to, that it would be log k to send x entirely, right? So if you wanted to tell this node what x is, you would need log base 2 of k bits to specify that. But you jumped right past that and said you can do much less than that, just do 1 bit, divide it into 2 groups. In other words, say whether it's in the first half or the second half of the tasks, and the counterpart just chooses any old task in the opposite half, right? So what we're going to actually want to do is not restrict these to be integer number of bits. So can we go less than 1 bit here? And let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, we're going to assume that this is a repeated scenario. So there's a lot of these requests, a lot of these scenarios repeating because you've buffered them up. And so x is actually assigned a sequence of independent task assignments. And we're still, what we want is for y, so x can save up its bits. So in this example, I'm going to say we're communicating a rate of 1/4. And k equals 5 just means these take values 1 through 5. So what that means is if x waits a while, here he's waited for 8 task assignments to be in the buffer. Now he's saved up 2 bits worth of communication, because we want 1/4 bit per task. So with those 2 bits, a message can be sent describing the entire sequence. And the decoder, Y, will take that bit sequence, and from it will construct its sequence of actions. Okay? And the goal here is that at each moment, they're doing different tasks. So, for example, they'll establish a protocol beforehand. We'll call it the code book. And that will be the function saying, given a message, which sequence is Y going to choose. And so basically, the encoder is going to look through this whole code book and look for something that does not conflict in any spot with its action sequence. And we'll see here that the first sequence conflicts right there on the 2. So you're not going to send 0, 0. But the second sequence doesn't conflict. So the encoder can send 0, 1. The decoder is going to choose this sequence, and they've achieved what they wanted to. Now, the sequence of actions is random. So there's a chance that you'll get a sequence for which you cannot find a counterpart in the code book. Everything conflicts. And that'll be an error event. And so we say a rate is achievable if the probability of error, the best probability of error at that rate, goes to 0 or can be made as small as possible, as small as you want, given that you can buffer up as many tasks before sending your message. Okay, so we want to know what's the minimum achievable rate here that'll let you accomplish this goal with arbitrarily small error. And now we're ready to talk about rates less than 1 in this setting. And so rate distortion theory provides a really nice insight. Rate distortion theory says that if you want to generate an action Y, a joint distribution of actions X and Y, where X is given by nature, then the amount of rate you need to do that is the mutual information between X and Y. So here mutual information is a function of entropies. It's the sum of the entropies minus the joint entropy. And entropy is just an expected value of the log of the inverse probability. So for each joint distribution, we can characterize what rate we need. And now we say what joint distribution would make this, what we're trying to accomplish, easiest. In other words, what will reduce the rate of the problem we're trying to solve, which is that X and Y are never equal. So it turns out that letting X and Y be uniform over all pairs of unequal actions minimizes this mutual information. And we get that the minimum rate needed is log k over k minus 1, which is roughly 1 over k, meaning that as k is large, then the rate needed is smaller and smaller, not larger and larger. And that kind of makes sense because if Y just chose a random action, most likely, if k is large, they're not going to conflict. So how can we take this notion of coordination and apply it to larger networks? This network has an interesting dilemma. So here we're going to do the same type of problem. X is assigned randomly 1, 2, or 3. And the goal is for Y1 and Y2 to be different from X and different from each other, so that everyone's doing one of the tasks. So here we could go ahead and assign Y1 a sequence using the scheme we just talked about, and that would take log 3 over 2 bits. But once we've done that, in order to make Y2 different than both X and Y1, we now have to be able to specify any arbitrary sequence, which would take log 3 bits to do. So doing this scheme where you do one first and then the other, the average rate is log 3 minus a half bits. We can look at that minus a half like the savings. Log 3 would be what it would take to send X entirely, and you save a half bit. And we can improve this by doing the following. Let Y1 and Y2 have default values. Okay, so Y1 is going to take the action X unless it's told otherwise, and Y2 takes the action, Y1 takes the action 1 unless it's told otherwise. Y2 takes the action 2 unless it's told otherwise. So now all that needs to be done is X needs to tell them if they need to move out of the way. And if they need to move out of the way, they always go to 3. So now the frequency with which they have to move out of the way is 1/3 of the time. So the rate needed here is the binary entropy of 1/3 to send this sequence of 0s and 1s that tells them when to move. And this reduces things, so now we save 2/3 bits rather than 1/2. Now both of these schemes are really coming from the same idea. And that idea is that if we want to generate a joint distribution P of x, y1, y2, this region is achievable. It's not optimal, but it's achievable. And it comes from first specifying one of the actions and then specifying the other action condition on the first two. There's an improved region where you use this message u to send in common to both of these nodes. So in other words, we're allowed to send different messages here. But if you send the same message first, and then you refine it with the individual messages afterwards, you actually improve efficiency. And that's what the role of u is here. So what we can do in this task assignment case is we first send a very low rate compressed version of x. I'm going to call that an estimate of x. It's a very poor estimate of x. It's usually not equal to x, but it's equal a little more often than it should be. So because of that, now once they receive this estimate, which I'm calling x hat, they choose default values so that neither of them are choosing x hat by default. So now, in a second stage, you say if they need to still move out of the way. But you've reduced the probability that they'll have to move out of the way. So you've reduced the rate for the second part where you move them out of the way, but you've added a first stage. So you can use calculus to figure out what the optimal compression is here. And we find that now we save log of the golden ratio. So the rates needed on each are log 3 minus log of the golden ratio with this scheme. So there's a general idea here that actually helps in a number of different networks. We've looked carefully at several networks, including these ones, and in all of them, the rates are improved by sending a common message to all nodes in the network and then refining it with private messages. This one here is particularly interesting. So here we have 2 nodes. I guess I should explain the way I'm doing these figures is the blue, if it's written in blue and pointing down at the node, then it's assigned randomly. And if it's coming out of the node and in black, then it's chosen by that node. Then the action is chosen by that node. So here we have 2 nodes that are each assigned actions, or we can think of it like sensing, like these are sensor measurements. And we have a third node that needs to produce something correlated with these. So we can think of this as maybe producing a sum of these 2, just for an example. And you might think that the best way to communicate here, if y is trying to get an estimate of the sum of x1 and x2, you might think that the best thing to do is send a good estimate of x1 here, and then at this node, combine that estimate with x2 to get an estimate of the sum, and then send that as best you can using R2. But this isn't always the best way to go. Even in this setting, it's sometimes better to have an estimate of x1 that is just forwarded by this node so that all nodes know that initial message. And then on top of that, to do the scheme we just mentioned, where you use the remaining rate to send a refined message that then the node in the middle combines with its information and compresses together. Okay. So next part of this talk, I want to say, first of all, in these examples, we don't know the characterization of the rate region in its entirety. In some settings we do. In this setting we do, but not in all the settings. But we still can say interesting things about the rates as the networks grow really large, and that's what we'll show next. So here's a larger network of computers. So, okay, in this setting, we have a cascade of communication, and the first node is assigned a task. There are k tasks total. We're going to keep this example of task assignment going throughout. We have k tasks total, and there are k computers. So every computer is going to get one task to do. But the first computer is assigned its task randomly. And we have the communication all has to follow this daisy chain to get to all the computers. So in this setting, the optimal way to communicate is to take care of the last node first. So first of all, you say, well, if I know what rate is needed to get the last node to choose something different than x. That's log of k over k minus 1. But once I've sent that message had to traverse every communication link. So that means every node along the way gets to peek at that message and knows what the last computer is going to do, the last node is going to do. So then they each can remove that from their list of tasks and repeat the problem to the second to last node. And this is optimal. We can show that it meets the cut set bound. So what we're really interested in is how does the sum rate of all the communication in this network scale with the number of nodes? And then we'll compare that to different network topologies and see what kind of comparisons we can make. So here, when you add up the rate on any given link, you have to add up all the messages that pass through that link. So for example, the second to last link has these 2 messages on it. And you add them up, you get some nice canceling. You find that log of k over I is the rate needed on each link. And when we add that up, again, we get some nice simplifications, and we find that it's approximately k log e. Now I'm using log e looks kind of funny. I'm using log base 2 if we're talking about bits. So the total communication needed for this problem is just linear in the number of nodes in the network. Now let's compare that to a very similar looking network, but here it's kind of complementary. So here, again, we have k computers, I keep saying computers, k nodes, and all but the last one are assigned random tasks. Random, but so that they're all different from each other. And so there's one task remaining, and the question is, how much needs to be said about each of these task assignments in order for the last node to be able to choose the remaining task? And so one interesting, for me, I like to look at this and say, well, what's the intuition here? Because we had a similar problem where instead we were assigning out a lot of tasks. Here we have the opposite where we're only assigning one task out. Is this going to require more rate or less rate than the previous setting? In fact, I want to see by show of hands how many people understand what I'm talking about. I want to see. So how many people think that, so this is a setting we just looked at where one task is assigned randomly. And how many people think that this new setting where all but one tasks are assigned randomly will require higher rates to accomplish? Okay. How many people think they'll require lower rates? All right, we're getting close to a tie. But I think higher rates won, and it is higher rates. It surprised me, actually. So I think the intuition behind this is that there's less flexibility now in the task assignments. When they all could choose their tasks, they had so much flexibility that they didn't need to specify so much in their messages. So let's look at some ideas for what to do here. One thing to note is that in this network, there are trade-offs. So if you increase the rate used in one link, you can decrease the necessary rate on other links. There's a complicated trade-off going on. So one idea is just accumulate all the information and send it across. So send x1 here as best you can. And once it gets here, send the pair x1 and x2 to the next node and so forth. You can save little bits, glean out little bits of efficiency by using the side information. But what you end up with is that the rate needed on each link with this scheme is going to be log of k minus 1 choose I. That means it's going to be large in the middle of the network. So not very nice if that was the best we could do, but we can do better. Instead, send x1, and the next node then takes the mod k sum of x1 and x2 and sends that. And at every point, they just take the mod k sum of everything they've seen so far and send it to the next node. Here, you never need more than log k bits on each link. And once you get the mod k sum of all of these guys, you can figure out which one was missing. So Y will be able to choose this task. So that would get you rates of log k on each link. So it would be k log k scaling. Worse than the previous network, but so far this is just an upper bound. So how can we find the lower bound and see if this is really the best you can do? Well, there's a very crude lower bound where you say ignore all the other rates in the network and just find the minimum rate on one link, on each link individually, and let the others do whatever they want. So this, you can use the cut-set bound to find some minimum rates. And you get that it's log of I plus 1 for the I link. But log of I plus 1 scales like k log k over e. In fact, that k over e is negligible. It doesn't even affect the constant of the k log k. So this lower bound meets the upper bound asymptotically, even with the same scaling constant. So the scaling in this network is k log k, even though we don't know precisely what it is. Okay, and so this network looks inherently more efficient. We have one node who has a direct link of communication to every other node. It's like we already looked at the smaller network of this type where we only had 3 nodes. And we can borrow ideas for what we already did and say, okay, why don't we try that default algorithm that we did before, where we're going to let each one of these have a default value, 1 through k minus 1, and x just tells them when they need to move out of the way. And we already saw, as before, now the rate needed is the binary entropy of 1 over k, which is roughly log k over k. And when you do it a little more carefully, you find that that the sum rate of all of these rates is going to be log k plus the small constant log e, roughly. Now, the good news, as far as bounds are concerned, is that a very simple bound says that you can't be below log k. Why is that? Well, if all of these nodes kind of combine their information together and tried to guess what x is, they would know what x is. Because once they finally choose tasks, they know they've chosen everything not equal to x. So the information that crosses this cut has to be at least log k. So we've seen, and again, you can improve this. It's not going to do much because we have an upper bound of log k plus a constant and a lower bound of log k. But you can improve it by first sending this estimate of x and then sending the refined message saying if they still need to move out of the way. So we've seen 3 different networks, very simple structures. And as they grow, even though we don't necessarily know the exact optimal rates, we find that we have bounds that are very close for large networks. And we also see that they're very different. Actually, each one of these has a different scaling law as far as the sum rate needed. And the final thing to notice about these results is that they use very different encoding schemes to achieve efficiency. If you tried taking the scheme that we used for the star, where we assign default tasks to everything, and you could say, well, I could try that here. Actually, it's a common thing, a suggestion I've heard. Why don't you try that up here? Just have them all have default values. If you do that, you get much worse. You get k log k scaling. So they actually need the compression algorithm customized for the network. It would be nice to have universal algorithms, but I don't have any. So, but one thing that's in common to all of them is that you do send a common message to many nodes and then refine it with a further message, and that improves efficiency. Okay, so this last topic is going to revisit the basic question of 2 nodes that we started with at the very beginning. And it seemed like we had finished that question, but we're going to revisit it from the point of view of having an adversary, wanting to maintain secrecy, being in a game theoretic setting. So, does anyone recognize this building? What? Yep. Okay. So we're going to find that coordinated behavior can serve as a bridge between the fields of cryptography and game theory. And there's been previous bridges between these fields. Let me mention one here. Dotis, Halevi, and Rabin approached a problem that touches on both cryptography and game theory. And what they did was they said, let's assume that you're in a game theoretic setting, but it's not strictly competitive. It's not a zero-sum game. So that means you might have correlated equilibria with your opponent that allow you to both do better in the game. What should you say to your opponent so that you can move towards these correlated equilibria and not give away too much about what your action is going to be? That's where the cryptography part comes in. So what I'm going to do is very different from that. I'm going to look at strictly competitive games, but the person you're communicating with is someone you completely trust. They're on your side in the game. We're going to see what type of communication is needed to establish coordinated behavior in this setting. So here's a simple zero-sum game. And what we do is, so I have 2 actions, 0 and 1. My enemy has 2 actions, 0 and 1. And each cell in this matrix says what my payoff is. So my enemy gets the negative of that. And we can see that if I choose 0 and it's established that I'm going to choose 0, my enemy can exploit that and choose 0 so that I only get a payoff of 1. If I'm going to choose 1 and he knows that, he'll choose 1 and I get a payoff of -1. So the best way to play this in a repeated setting is to randomly choose 0 and 1 with the appropriate distribution to maximize your expected payoff. Now what if we have a team of players who get the same payoff? So now we've got an X and a Y, me and my partner, who are each going to choose an action 0 or 1. Now there's 4 possible choices on my team. And again, it's just a zero-sum game, so we can figure out what the optimal joint distribution is to play in this game. But what if the 2 players are physically separated, they don't have some joint randomness to use to choose their actions? Well, then they're stuck with choosing independent actions and optimizing over the best independent actions for the game. But if they have some communication between them, then they can now choose correlated actions. So that's the way we're going to approach this problem. And let's go back to a slide that I showed near the beginning, where I said that rate distortion theory provides us the intuition that if we want to generate X and Y correlated according to some desired distribution, then the mutual information is the amount we need to send about X to Y. There's one important catch here, and that is that we're really dealing with a sequence of actions and describing those and generating a sequence of counterpart actions, Y. It's true that using rate distortion theory, you'll get a joint distribution of X and Y, but they won't be independent from one time to the next. So when would we care about that, about them not being independent? Well, clearly we don't care in the task assignment problem. All we care about is getting the tasks done. We're not trying to trick anyone by using independent actions from one time to the next. But there are settings when we will care, in particular repeated game settings. And the question that I want to address is, what's the price of independence then? We can achieve a joint distribution without the independence from across time using mutual information. What do we need to do to have them be independent? And so I've devised a game that I affectionately call Billy and the Bully, and it's just this very simple story. So Billy likes to go out and have fun, and he doesn't mind staying in either, but he enjoys going out 3 times as much as he likes staying in. But there's some bully that harasses him, and we'll come to his house and throw rocks and yell things from the street, or we'll go to the hangout place and harass him, and they each have to choose every day which place they're going to go. So, well, Billy's optimal strategy would be to stay home with a 3/4 chance every day. Okay, and there's a catch. His friends, he wants to hang out with his friends, and they go to. There's a couple of hangout places, very popular ones, named 0 and 1, and they're going to show up at one of these, and he needs to decide, if he's going out, he needs to decide where he's going, and if he goes to the wrong place, then he doesn't get any value from that either. So you'd like his friends to tell him where they're going, so he can, and then he'd never choose the wrong place to go. That's not a useful strategy. So, but he's only going to show up 1/4 of the time. Do they really need to tell him where they are every single day if he's only going to come 1/4 of the time? And that leads us to this puzzle. So here's the sequence of random sequence of hangout places that they choose. So we have a binary sequence that person A knows. We want to communicate with person B so that they can reconstruct that sequence, but replacing some of them with staying at home, in which case he doesn't have to know where you're hanging out, right? So these E's are the staying at home. And we need the location of the E's to be random. That's the whole point about it. We're playing against Billy. We don't want him to know what days you're staying home. So the question is, how much needs to be communicated here so that person B can reconstruct the sequence with all these erasures in it? And clearly, if you weren't concerned about randomizing, then you would just pick some fixed locations of the erasures, and you'd only send 1/4 of the locations, just the days that Billy's coming, and you'd be set. But what happens when the location of the erasures needs to be random? Okay, so this is, to make it concrete, I'm actually going to simplify it a little bit and say, let's just look at a sequence of 8. So you have 8 binary numbers, and we're going to say that exactly 6 erasures are going to show up, but we want them to be a random choice of 6 out of 8. So what can we do to communicate here? Well, one idea is let's just say what we're doing every day. Okay. Now I'm not going to limit the bits to be integer valued bits. So really, all we care about is the size of our message set. How many possible different messages do we need to say? We want that to be as small as possible, and if we take the log of that, we'll call it bits. Okay, so to describe the entire sequence, you need 8 bits. And then person B just randomly selects the location of the erasures. Or you could do it the other way. Have person A choose the location of the erasures randomly, and then describe that sequence. So, and then person B doesn't do any of the randomizing. He just receives the sequence saying, this is when you're coming, and this is where you'll go. So, so there are 8 choose 2 possible sequences of places to put the erasures, and then there's the 2 bits after you've said where the erasures are. So the amount of bits needed total here is 6.81. It's better than sending the entire thing. But here's a key idea that we'll see in the next result, is that you can split the randomizing partly among person A and partly among person B. So here's an idea for reducing this further. Person A divides these 8 bits into 4 cells of 2 and randomly chooses 2 of them and tells person B which 2 he chose and also which bits those were. Okay, so person B now receives not the entire sequence, but 4 of the 8 bits. How much communication does this require? Well, there are 4 choose 2 possible choices of the cells, and then you had to specify 4 bits on top of that. Now, person B then goes and fills in 2 more erasures. Okay, and the communication needed here, like I said, is log of 4 choose 2 plus 4 bits is less than either of these previous cases, 6.58. Now, I hope someone is sitting there saying that I cheated, because now these erasures are not going to be equally likely among all the possible 8 choose 2 locations. I've clumped them in pairs. They're more likely to show up in pairs, right? But actually, person B just needs to be careful about how he chooses the erasures, and he can fix all that. If person B, when he chooses the 2 remaining erasures, if he chooses one and then conditioned on that first one, only chooses the other pair in the cell with probably 1/7, chooses the other 2 with probably 3/7 each, then you end up doing exactly what we wanted to do. Okay, so this idea of randomizing a little bit at both ends ends up being key in this type of problem. So Weiner defined a quantity common information, and it's, as you can see, it's based on mutual information, but it's actually a minimization where you consider all U that separate X and Y into a Markov chain, and you find the minimum mutual information over all such U. And so this quantity here he found to be the answer to an interesting problem. How much common randomness do you need to generate IID samples of a pair of variables X and Y? And so it turns out that in a repeated game setting, in a repeated zero-sum game setting, if you have common randomness, there's no better way to use it than to generate IID sequences. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Clearly, if you had enough common randomness to generate the optimal action distribution, then you would do it. But what if the common randomness that you have is less than you would need to do your optimal actions? What I'm saying here is that you would then find a different distribution that you can achieve using this common information as your criterion, and you would use that scheme. You wouldn't do some other thing where you say, well, I'm going to give up the independence a little bit in order to get a better distribution. You still stick with this where you generate IID samples, and you just stay within the realm of what distributions you can achieve at your rate. So in an encryption setting, we can tie this in as well and say, the standard setting for encryption is that you have a variable x, some information that you want to send to another location, and you don't want, there's some enemy listening in, and you don't want the enemy to be able to learn anything about your information. So in order to do this, the sender and the receiver both have to have some secret key. And Shannon showed what would be considered a negative result, that the secret key needed is as much as the entropy of the message. In other words, you need as much secret key as the length of the message. If you want, now we're not assuming any computational limits on the eavesdropper. So, and the way to do that is with the one-time pad. You take your message of bits, take the secret key that's as long as the message, and it's just random bits. And if you do an exclusive OR on each one, you get something to transmit that's independent of the message. And then the receiver can do another exclusive OR with the secret key and get back the message. So this is the one-time pad. And what we want to ask is, can we reduce these requirements and still not compromise on secrecy? Let's look at it more in the light of a game theoretic perspective, where X is this sensitive information you don't want leaked to the eavesdropper, but you don't necessarily need to receive X at the other side. You need to generate a Y correlated with X. These are going to be actions in some game. And now how much communication and secret key do we need? And it turns out, so we would have a desired distribution P of Y given X, and X is supplied from some random source. And it turns out that there's actually going to be a trade-off now between the communication rate and the secret key rate. So whereas in the other case, you knew that the secret key had to be as great as the entropy of the message, in this case, you have some flexibility. If you're willing to use a higher communication rate, you can reduce the secret key rate, and so forth. And the trade-off is characterized by this region here, where we again choose an auxiliary. We choose a variable u that separates X and Y into a Markov chain and satisfy these mutual information conditions. And in particular, we find something interesting, that if we have some region that gives a trade-off between R1, which is the communication, and R2, which is the secret key. And if we go to the extreme boundary of the minimum communication needed would be this boundary, we find quite simply from these inequalities that it's going to be the mutual information between X and Y. But if we go and look at the fundamental limit of the minimum secret key needed, this is by definition Weiner's common information. So the common information ends up coming up as one of the fundamental quantities for these adversarial game theoretic settings or encryption settings. And the idea for how to achieve this, I'll just briefly illustrate. So the sequence xn comes from some space of all xn sequences, and is randomly supplied from some random source. And what we're trying to do is generate a y as it correlated with x, so as if it passed through some memoryless channel to y. Here I've drawn it as if there's some jointly typical set of y sequences from which we want to choose randomly. But the way we'll do this is we'll choose a u that separates these in a Markov chain, and we'll make a codebook of u sequences. And then, in fact, we're not just going to make one codebook, we're going to make many codebooks. I've drawn them with colors here. And a secret key is going to tell us which codebook to use. Then we find a u that's correlated with x in the appropriate codebook, and we send the index of that u sequence. Now, the receiver, Y, then knows the U sequence we have in mind and can randomly choose Y condition on U. Now, this isn't random enough. We wanted it to look like this, and we end up with a smaller amount of randomization that's been done. But luckily, the choice of codebook was random by means of the secret key. So the overall effect is a mixture of a bunch of different clouds of conditional distributions, and in the end, we need to make sure that we have enough codebooks so that this mixture of clouds looks just like the single cloud and can't be told apart from the single cloud. And some previous results related to distinguishing inputs of a channel. I guess I should explain that a little better. So both Weiner and Hahn and Verdue noticed a property that Hahn and Verdue called resolvability, that if you have a memoryless channel and you put IID inputs into it, you get IID inputs out. But what if instead you just have some set of input sequences and you randomly choose one of those sequences and put it in? How large does that set need to be so that the output's still IID? That they call resolvability. The same concept has to do with this cloud mixing and is related to this result. And the lower bound, I won't go into detail on that. So let's look at one last concrete example, sort of concrete, cooked-up example of how to use this result. Let's go back to the task assignment and say that X is a random task in the set 1 through K. And Y now doesn't just need to be a different task. Y needs to be randomly chosen among all the tasks not equal to X. So the setting might be the following. X might be monitoring something, maybe some flows of traffic in a network. There's K things to monitor, and X can only do one at a time. Now, if X went through in some deterministic sequence, then they just behave when they're being watched and then misbehave when they're not being watched. I think the book Patriot Games has like a situation where a satellite is trying to observe a terrorist camp, and every time they never see anything there, and then main character has a nice idea to change some angles of the cameras on the satellite so that they're observing it at a different time of day, and boom, they see all this activity. So because it's an adversarial setting, we want the choice of X to be random. So assume now that X has some random schedule of things to monitor, and then Y jumps into the system and is fully trusted and says, I'll help you monitor, tell me what you're doing, and I'll choose something else randomly to watch. So the question is, what do we need to send? Do we need to send the whole time schedule and encrypt it with a one-time pad? Well, we can use the result from the previous page to say, no, we don't need to send that much. We get a trade-off between the rate of communication and the rate of secret key. And here at one extreme, where we minimize secret key rate as much as possible, we find that no matter what K is, by the way, the point 1, 2 is achievable. So 1 bit of communication and 2 bits of secret key will get the job done. And to achieve that point, what you're basically doing is you use your 1 bit of communication to specify a set to Y of actions to choose from. So just like, so Gautam had a suggestion at the very beginning when we were looking at the vanilla task assignment problem to just divide your tasks into 2 sets and tell them which one you're in. So you do that here. You say randomly choose among this half set. And now that's going to get it fairly random, but not random enough. So the secret key then is used to inject randomness into the protocol. In other words, these sets, so it only takes 1 bit to say whether you're in the set or not, but the sets themselves are generated randomly from the secret key. And if they're random enough, then the overall effect is that Y will be chosen uniformly among everything not equal to X. And then to move up to use less communication and more secret key, you just reduce the size of those sets. And you now hand Y a smaller set and say randomize over this set. It's easier from the communication perspective because you give less away about X. But now Y can only do a smaller amount of randomizing on its own, so you have to inject more randomness into the protocol. and you need more secret key in the end. And these results, what we like to do is extend these to larger networks. And some of the, even in the adversarial settings, there's some natural extensions that can be made. And but we've noticed that, so mutual information captured a lot of what we were interested in without the adversary, but we start getting other quantities like common information coming in when we have an adversary. So in the non-adversarial case, we looked at some networks as they scaled very large and found some interesting results. In the adversarial case, here I only showed 2 nodes, but we saw that secret key, fundamental limit for minimum secret key was a common information of the joint distribution. Okay, well, now for the fun part of the talk, right? So, what in the? Oh, okay. So I'd like to first of all thank David Ragosa for coming here. He bailed me out at the last minute, and I really appreciate it to take part of as the chair of the committee. And so Ben Von Roy, I met my first year here. He gave me my lowest score on the quals, and then I couldn't stay away from him after that. So we've worked on a few things together, and it's been a lot of fun. And we've had interesting discussions lately on topics outside my research area, and it's been fun. So Abbas El-Gamal, I've enjoyed a lot of things about working with him, sharing ideas with him. But one fun thing about talking with Abbas is that if I have a conversation with him and I'm wrong about something, and sometimes he won't want to straighten it out because he won't want to take the time to correct me, so he'll just agree. So when I leave, I always have to check, did what I say make sense or not? So it's a fun game, and I really enjoy his insights and the work I've been able to do with him. Saki Weissman. So a lot of people I've worked with have been more senior faculty members, and Saki, it's been really fun to be involved with this fresh young academic, and he has such a powerful set of math skills and good intuition, and it's been great to work with him. And of course, Thomas Cover has made my graduate experience at Stanford. So I guess Abbas told me that when I came here, I seemed to know what I wanted, and I can thank Tom for showing me that I didn't really know what I wanted. When I came here, I had no idea what information theory was, and it wasn't until I took his class that I was introduced to it, and I thought, this is the next best thing to calculus. I can't believe I've been avoiding it for so long. So I've really the broadening of my understanding and the friendship and association I've really appreciated. And of course, my wife Larissa, we made the decision to come to grad school together, and she's put up with everything that's meant along the way, and it's been a great fun experience for the both of us. Of course, Denise Murphy's been a lot of help, especially lately as I've been rushing to get this defense together. And there's a couple other professors I should mention who I spent some time working with, Balaji Prabhakar and Bernie Widrow, and they both gave me a lot of good direction, and we were able to do some fun work together. And of course, there are many more. In fact, I wrote a longer list of names of people I appreciate. So, thank you.
Is that alphabetical? Yes, I'd like to thank David Ragosa for being the chairman of the committee. And we have time for some questions. After the questions, we'll break for 5 minutes and then have a closed session. Any questions?
Not Saki. Okay.
The high achievable point was log k, and then it was log k over k minus 1. I just wondering why it's k over k minus 1 instead of 0, because if you send log k with a secret key, you're sending the exact index. And then can't they You're
wondering why that's not 0?
Yeah, because if you send send log K, that's equivalent to I've sent X
No, this is
Y the index.
this is the secret key.
Yeah.
This is the communication. So the secret key is independent of X.
But I'm just wondering. Oh.
The secret key is independent of X.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Join.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
And then, okay, so, but the eavesdropper would see the communication anyway. So even if you specified the action exactly, you'd still need to one-time pad it, right? Yeah.
All right, there's some refreshments out there. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back to the
Did you?
He's gonna ask questions now that he opened the case. Yes. So, did he ever say anything Did it still work? Yeah. I mean, it's fine.
Okay, just then, are we going to try picking up Snake now?
Yeah. So apparently it worked.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask questions. I'm gonna now change it to Skype so we'll get audio. Yes, we haven't talked about the work of the class.
Oh, yeah. I was a game there. I worked for Morgan.
And where did you do this?
I was a principal. In statistics. Morgan, finance.
Okay, cool. You know, I have an offer. Yeah, and electrical engineering.
We might talk about it.
Yeah, we should.
I was going to ask you what your plans were.
So far, that looks like the plan. But I'm curious. I have a few other choices, not in academia, but you know, I'd like to talk to them. How long were you there?
I was there about 7 years. So at the end of the period, I was spending a lot of time with Noah.
Oh yeah. Oh. So even while you were there, you're spending a lot of time with them.
Yeah, because it was John Tukey and Morgan Stern. Anyhow, that was yeah, I haven't paid much attention to it. It is useful. I'm finally good at planning. Not only
I have a lot to learn about it. Oh, we can just like yeah. Interesting. Really? That's fun. Wow. Thanks for coming, guys. Yeah. Okay. Where's your office? Okay. Okay. Thanks, Simone. Good talking to you.
Congrats, guys.
Yeah.
I wish I understood more of it, but it sounded like it was.
I don't know. I know I felt like I was going too slow in the pace the whole time.
Oh, not at all.
Not at all.
No, well,
And my jokes weren't always funny.
No, I like the little references, like Patriot games and no, I like the Billy and the Bully. It was like you were trying to explain it to your kids or something one day, and you're like, how can I put this in simpler terms? No, I liked it.
So, yeah, I really well, a lot of this came from my job talk, but I've been this whole week I've been trying to get a committee, so I didn't start making getting somebody until last night.
What? Oh, I thought you'd rehearse this more. Oh, wow.
I was sitting here before and hoping I remembered how it all progressed.
Oh.
But I mean, I've done job talks. I reordered a lot of stuff,
Okay.
and I added maybe 1/5 of the stuff is new. But so I've done the job talks, so I'm familiar with those.
Wow. Okay. It sounded like it was something It sounded like it was very silly. So where was he? The tennis part?
Let me get talking on this.
Paul, thanks for inviting me. Enjoyed it.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for coming. Okay, sorry to keep you waiting. Let me change this.